How does one get from a cherry farm in Oregon to a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist who has lived and traveled 6 continents, all 50 states, every Japanese and Chinese province and island, and have certainly reported from many of those places on the darkest sides of human nature? When I read your columns, I'm not only grateful, but I always think, well, how do you personally process what you see and write about?
You know, people always think that I must be profoundly depressed or highly neurotic. And they often ask this question kind of on eggshells, waiting for me to erupt in some way. And you know, the truth is that I think that maybe one mistake that the humanitarian world has made is to focus so much on all the terrible things that happen that we don't fully acknowledge the progress. And the truth is that side by side with the worst things happening in the world, you see the very best. And so in my travels, yeah, I see trafficking, genocide, kids dying, but right beside that you see the most amazing expressions of humanity, of altruism, that reassure my faith in humanity. Some of you may have seen the film Reporter, which followed me in Congo, and you know, that we talked to a warlord who was engaged in murder and mass rape. We saw a woman who was dying. We saw all kinds of terrible things. But maybe the single thing that shaped me the most from that trip, or that left me with the deepest impression, was this amazing Polish nun in this town of Rutsuru in eastern Congo, who was single-handedly feeding orphans, staving off the warlord, educating young people, and she restored my faith in what humans are capable of more than the warlord undermined it. So I actually came back from eastern Congo feeling better about humanity, if you believe it or not. And
which is hard to do in eastern Congo.
Which is, well, you know, except that almost every place you go in eastern Congo or in Darfur, you see these just amazing examples of courage, resilience, that really are, I mean, they do leave this profound impression on me. And in contrast, in the US, we're not tested in the same way. You know, there you express your humanity by saving all these people being attacked by the warlord. Here you express your humanity by buying a new iPad. And, you know, all in all, eastern Congo can be a pretty reassuring place.
And hadn't thought about it that way, Nick.
Brought to you by the Eastern Congo Tourist Association.
Makes me feel much better. When I read your columns, I am, as I said, like many, very grateful that you do take on the kind of stories that you hear so often, press report, oh, can't write those stories, nobody really wants to read about that. But you continue to write them. There was a particularly heartwarming one recently about a girl at 6 who was kidnapped, raped, tortured, put into the sex trafficking trade. And in those columns, though, you always feel that you're saying to all of us, you're calling on our best spirit, do something. This doesn't have to be this way. So what kind of responses do you get from columns like that?
Well, initially, I was kind of discouraged because, frankly, you know, not very much. People always ask why there isn't more journalism about these kinds of issues. I mean, the truth is that if I write about an issue that is kind of on the agenda, then you get an outpouring of responses. During the Bush years, I could just about hit an F5 key on my keyboard and do a Bush sucks column, you know, and you'd get this amazing outpouring, way to go, you know, and it was so easy. And meanwhile, you go halfway around the world and you write about some of these issues. And the truth is that, you know, and I do my market research by going on the subway and I watch people read the newspaper, and you see that, you know, most people, they get to a column about one of these issues and they think, okay, Africa, Asia, whatever, something sad happening, I've got to be at work in 20 minutes. I don't need to read that. And so there is much less feedback from these. It was really partly frustration at the lack of response from Darfur columns that led me to some of the work in social psychology about how you engage readers, and a fellow named Paul Slovic has done fascinating work. And it's complicated, but one of the answers is you talk about individual stories as a way of building a pathway that gets people to care. And another is don't be utterly depressing all the time, but show that evidently I didn't entirely succeed, that to show that engagement does make a difference and that it's not hopeless. And so that's why I often write about these cases. One of the problems is that when I write about these, everybody wants to help the individual that I wrote about rather than the class of people that are affected. And so I sometimes try to pull a kind of a bait and switch, but that is the basic problem, that you can make one individual luminous and then people want to help that individual, but it's completely by chance that that 6-year-old, that girl who I wrote about her, but I could have written about any one of 1,000 others. And that for me is the biggest challenge, to get people to care not about that particular individual in my column, but about this larger problem.
And you do make it, you can save sort of one brothel or one girl at a time, but what we're all trying to find is is there a lever somewhere, some sort of emotional connection, resilience? And in all of your travels and your writing, do you see one? Is there something that triggers a different kind of response that goes way beyond that individual response?
I'm, I guess, more and more a believer in education as the kind of intervention that affects everything else, whether it's health, whether it's capacity to generate income, or indeed resilience. It just equips people to have a better interaction with the world, if you will. And I think of one girl I met in Calcutta who had a 4th grade education, and she was trafficked with a bunch of other girls to a brothel in the middle of India. The other girls were all completely illiterate, had no education. But because she just had a 4th grade education, which we would tend to think of as nothing, she had the wherewithal to figure out that she could escape. She wasn't as acquiescent. She saved up a little bit of money that she got from customers as tips. She escaped. She got to the railway station. She could read the sign to figure out where the train was to Calcutta, and she escaped. And brothel owners always, they try to kidnap illiterate girls for a reason, that they can get away with it. So I think education, to me, is not only incredibly cheap, and it's not a silver bullet, but it is part of silver buckshot, if you will, that makes a difference.
In the book, Half the Sky, you cite many examples like that young woman. Stories of women and girls, and you make the point over and over again that investing in these girls with education and empowering women, that's the trigger, that's the tool that's going to, make the world a more sustainable, peaceful place. So why isn't it happening, Nick?
Oh, it is. I really think this is a war that we are winning. If you look at almost every index, whether it's girls going to school, whether it's maternal mortality, then I think we're seeing real improvements. And I think there's also, if NGOs increasingly are focused on women, and they're focused on that partly because you just often get more bang for the buck when you invest in women, but also they realize it's clever marketing. If you want to raise money, then this is a way to do it. It always strikes me that the military in Afghanistan, that one of the things they've figured out is that one of the best factors that correlates to violence in any given district in Afghanistan is the proportion of girls who are educated there. And so soldiers who were actually out getting shot at, they've become huge advocates of girls' education in Afghanistan. So I think that this issue is now on the agenda to stay. I think that increasingly governments around the world, donor governments and recipient governments, recognize that this is how you get economic growth. And I think that we in the news media are also doing a better job of recognizing that this is what I would say the foremost human rights issue of our time.
Thank you for making it so.